Remember when I said you could look forward to this review? Well, to warn you in advance, those of you who have watched Golden Wind are likely about to feel very differently if you're going ahead and watching this whole thing through, because I don't feel quite as strongly about this part as I know a lot of fans do. For those of you that have yet to watch this part, there will be minor spoilers, so if you want to go into it totally fresh, here's your warning. Also, I apologize for this being almost 2 months overdue. It's just that it took me a really long time to fully process what were initially very complicated feelings about this part. But now I'm ready to put my thoughts out there. Hope you enjoy. Golden Wind, the fifth part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and the fourth season of the David Productions adaptation, takes place 2 years after Diamond is unbreakable in the city of Naples, Italy. Giorno, revealed early in the first episode to be the son of Dio Brando, ventures into Naples' criminal underworld as he embarks on a journey to overthrow its current hierarchy and become its new boss, in the service of making life for the city's citizens a better one and bringing them out of the crime world's dark throes. Along the way, Giorno gathers a group of new allies he has to work to earn the trust of, and is eventually pit against a foe whose threat lies in his resolve to remain at the top of the food chain no matter the cost. Okay, going rapid fire to get all my thoughts out right from the get-go. The things in Golden Wind I liked. There are more moments where the action becomes damn near electric with its choreography. The animation is more fluid and dynamic during fights. The sound design is the best in the series since Stardust Crusaders. The main villains stand easily as the most terrifying one of parts 3 to 5 with its unprecedented level of expressiveness, to the point where the stand itself could be its own antagonist. Giorno far and away has the best main character theme in the series. The visuals are especially gorgeous to look at, the main characters are as entertaining as ever, and the first couple of episodes have a strong central focus. Now, still rapid fire. The bad. The story becomes increasingly more cluttered after the main characters encounter the main villain for the first time. Stand of the week. Again. Just make a single group of recurring villains like the Pillarmen that don't go down easily, for goodness sake. Various plot elements feel like they become irrelevant the further you watch. It turns out the main villain isn't really all that interesting after all the initial mystery that's built up around him. The soundtrack isn't quite as memorable as its predecessors because most of the time they just keep replaying Giorno's theme in 7 different ways. Characters' backstories are thoroughly narrated to you instead of being presented in a way that feels organic. Giorno feels like he gets sidelined later on in the story by his castmates, and the ending doesn't feel like the culmination of a long, hard-fought struggle so much as it feels like the finish of an exhausting marathon, especially with 2 flashback episodes being awkwardly inserted right after the conclusion of the main story conflict. Okay. Now that I've got all that out of the way, I'm hoping this will make it a bit easier for me to convey my thoughts without it turning into me rambling. Let's get into it and talk about why I don't think Golden Wind's story ends up being quite as strong as it first sounds.
Golden
Wind has an incredibly strong start with its first 2 episodes. I'd argue that it perhaps has the strongest start in the series so far. It provides an insightful introduction to our lead without being too overt, introduces the audience to the world this part is set in, and has exciting action almost right out of the gate. During this, I believed this part stood a really good chance of beating part 2 as my favorite. As you'd expect, we begin to follow Giorno as he navigates his way through Naples' criminal underworld, and we're gradually introduced to the group of allies that will be helping him on his journey. It hits us with that good old stand of the week structure that was present in the last 2 parts. But its integration is at least made more relevant in the first half by reducing the number of pursuing enemies to a squad of 7 and a separate pair with their own agenda. Even though I feel 2 members of the squad of 7 didn't need the standard 2-part episodes that side enemies often fill time for. Eventually, they meet the main villain in a thrilling confrontation and witness his overwhelming power firsthand, coming to understand that they have no hope of defeating him head-on. And this is where things begin to go downhill. Not yet finished with throwing stand users at the audience that proved to be little more than bothersome hiccups along the way, there are 5 more enemies that Giorno and his crew have to defeat. only one of which has an engaging presence as it serves to have a direct influence on one of the main characters. The other 4, even though they come in separate pairs in their respective two-parters, do little more than unnecessarily pad out the runtime. In addition to that, the story somewhat shifts directions as it begins to call back to Stardust Crusaders in a way that becomes integral to the plot almost out of nowhere, abruptly widening the stakes from something that feels smaller and more personal in scale to something that expands them to a matter of being fate of the world. In essence, what I'm trying to get at here is that while Golden Wind has a generally good start, the latter half ends up feeling like it's trying to be several different shows at once and ends up failing at doing so. It becomes one part successor to Stardust Crusaders, one part a crime drama, and one part a mystery thriller, cobbled together in a way that doesn't quite gel together the way I think it could or should have. The consequence of this is a jumble of episodes after 21 that feel like their connected focus is muddied, padding out this part's length to one that's longer than it needs to be. Incredulously so, this makes the climactic third act a disengaging one, as it drags out its events to the point where it starts feeling like a slog to get to anything exciting or thematically relevant in a way that doesn't feel ham-fisted. There is a consistent theme tied to the main villain that carries through to the end, but the execution of it ends up feeling hollow, especially when the last couple of enemies Giorno and his team must defeat distract from that central theme in ways that don't add anything to the main story or that of each individual main character sans Trish. Ultimately, a lot of this part becomes white noise pretty much immediately after the main villain's first direct appearance. From a story about a group of fiends trying to find purpose and justice in a cruel world, we end up going the way of Rise of Skywalker and follow a MacGuffin hunt that has little to do with the character's personal desires, so much as it has to do with the necessity of stopping the bad guy from winning. At least in Stardust Crusaders, Jotaro was constantly being motivated by the threat posed to a loved one if he didn't succeed in defeating Dio. Its story has a tie to its protagonist, and the road trip nature of that story allows for moments where the main characters grow closer to each other and bond through their shared journey, even if it isn't the most fleshed out development. Meanwhile, Golden Wind sacrifices its character work for spectacle the further things move along, and as a result, the journey begins to feel like it's 10 episodes longer than necessary, with characters existing solely to exposit necessary information, having little in the way of notable growth or change. Speaking of which, let's have a closer look at the characters now that my thoughts on the story are out of the way. Giorno Giovanna is Dio Brando's son, more on this in a bit, who grew up aspiring to be a gangster after admiring one in his youth who saved him from a life of misery. Though mostly soft-spoken, he's shown to have an appreciation of natural life and those with good intentions, also looking to stay out of physical altercations as much as possible and to avoid doing anything that, in his own words, could be considered pointless. Bruno Bucciarati is a member of the mafia group Passion and the leader of a team of stand users in it, who forms an alliance with Giorno after hearing of his dream to reform the criminal underworld. He's a man who cares very deeply about his team and will do whatever it takes to ensure their safety, not dissimilar to Giorno in the way that he favors noble people and causes. Panacotta Fugo is a man prone to anger who effectively disappears from the show after episode 21, which is joked about a lot, but makes more sense when you look up the reason behind Araki writing him out. Narancia is Fugo's adoptive older brother, even though it feels like he should be the younger one, who took the fall for a crime he didn't commit and found a reason to live on through Passion and Fugo's kindness. He's not the most mature one in the team, but is a loyal follower regardless. Leone Abbacchio is a man with a stone-cold persona who has closed himself off emotionally after a traumatic incident in his past, but is unendingly loyal to Bruno for taking him in and giving him a cause to devote himself to. He's firmly distrustful of Giorno and fails to see what he brings to the table that the rest of the team doesn't already. Guido Mista is a young man who wants to live a laid-back life, but is still a good-natured person and will fight for innocent people where he can. Una Trish is the daughter of Passion's mysterious leader, who has lived her whole life without knowing who her father really is, and is suddenly given a chance to find that out when Giorno and the others enter the fray. I also found out a while after finishing this part that there's a running gag about people looking up Rule 34 content for Trish, but she's 15 years old for goodness sake. As far as JoJo main characters go, Golden Winds are the most fleshed out of parts 1 to 5, all of them with detailed backstories defining who they are. They each have standout personality traits without being flat cardboard cutouts that are defined only by those traits, and it's fun to watch how some of these personalities both clash and mesh with each other during their interactions over the course of this part. That said, as I briefly mentioned before, the way we learn about these characters also has a fundamental flaw. It breaks the show don't tell rule on a very frequent basis. As though it isn't enough that almost every character is given complete flashbacks one episode after the other, repeatedly disrupting the flow of events that happen in the present day, the narrator is present in all of them to an absolutely egregious degree, going over every single detail of the characters' past lives even where it's unnecessary, and dictating every single thought and feeling to the audience as though they're incapable of reading between the lines or even what's directly in front of them, erasing any semblance of nuance that could be derived from us getting an introspect into these characters' histories. Trish is the only main character who doesn't fall victim to this because of the nature of her relationship surrounding a villain whose name we never learn until the part's last third, and she's one of the more interesting cast members for it. On the note of interesting cast members, let's go back to Giorno. Remember how I mentioned that Giorno is the son of Dio, the immortal vampire who was a persistent enemy of the Joestar bloodline for hundreds of years and committed an innumerable number of horrific acts in the service of his own gain? Well, you don't really need to. The fact that Giorno is his son is only somewhat relevant for the first 4 episodes, then is forgotten entirely after that. Even though there's quite a bit of substance to explore with that, even though there are opportunities for this to be a relevant story thread and a source of internal conflict for our hero born from a twisted legacy, in contrast to every other Joestar that's come before him, the connection isn't really referenced beyond a single photograph, and personally I think that's quite a missed opportunity. It's not exactly a must for inclusion, because the premise Golden Wind's first half takes things is still quite intriguing without it, but it would have been a very compelling part of Giorno's character to explore. He already inherits his father's infamous battle cries as it is. And all of this is putting aside how much he seems to just be a non-presence from around the halfway point onward. Basically, Giorno suffers from one of the same flaws Jotaro did in Part 3, which was that one of the side characters felt more like the central protagonist than the one initially presented. For Stardust Crusaders, that was Polnareff, and for Golden Wind, it's Bucciarati. Not only does Giorno end up disappearing for significant periods of time as things progress, but the things he does do when he's present don't really speak to any significant triumph or development of any kind until episode 37, where he defeats the main villain. Spoiler for the obvious, I guess. He becomes another face in the crowd, and while it's good to give all your characters equal focus, see My Hero Academia for how to make side characters feel like main characters without overshadowing the main protagonist, you don't want to be caught in the pitfall where it doesn't feel like the main character is ever really directing their story. More than Giorno, you feel more compelled to root for Bucciarati's successes and sometimes even Trish's, because their presence is much more frequent and they're given more opportunities for change and retrospect. Moving on from Giorno's lack of agency in the plot, Golden Wind's main villain, who is an ultimately unimportant name I won't mention for those who really want to go into that mystery totally blind, is... Actually, now that I think about it, he's cool for only about 3 episodes and that's it. Often animated in a style much rougher and more aggressive than the other characters and stands in a way that shows its raw ferocity, his endlessly perplexing and wildly intimidating stand do most of the heavy lifting for him. The boss's concept is interesting, being a man who's amassed a massive criminal empire and is so obsessed with maintaining his rule that no one in that empire has so much as seen his face. However, like a lot of other things in this part, that concept doesn't really stick the landing of its execution. There isn't really anything about him that's interesting, and beyond the goal of making sure no one ever knows who he is, he has no real depth as a character. Dio wasn't exactly a 3-dimensional antagonist either, but he's still incredibly memorable because of how wicked and proudly evil he is. The way he's characterized in Phantom Blood made it so that, even without his meme-worthy stand in Stardust Crusaders, he's still an entertaining villain to watch. Take away King Crimson from the boss, and you're not left with, well, a whole lot to work with, his very distinct character design aside. It's unfortunate, considering how spine-chilling his stand's introduction is. I really do think that maybe there is some potential in King Crimson itself being the main villain, completely detached from a user. With all that said, last but not least, let's discuss how this part handles one of the series' star attractions, the stand battles. Choreography-wise, JoJo has always been rather lacking with its fights. their excitement comes more from the strategy put into many of the battles, and in the case of parts 3 to 5, the moments when their respective Jo-stars unleash a relentless beatdown that in some instances spans across several manga pages. After all, sometimes what you need isn't necessarily a Raid 2 style grapple, just a good old-fashioned beatdown against an asshole sorely in need of comeuppance. However, namely with the fights involving Giorno and Bucciarati, the action in Golden Wind becomes much more active and hands-on, combining ingenious moments of the characters coming up with new solutions to their problems on the spot with impactful, hands-on violence. Two battles exemplifying this are Giorno and Bucciarati's initial scuffle in episode 2, and the latter's fight with side villains Prosciutto and Pesci in episode 16, both of which are among the few stand battles to date that had me nearly jumping out of my chair with excitement. Several of Golden Wind's battles put on display some of the best of what stand battles have to offer, not quite reaching their absolute peak, but still putting a variety of different elements to use that make this part's action some of the most thrilling it's ever been in the series so far. For the anime, at least. Provided David Productions doesn't mess up the adaptation somehow, I have confidence that many of Stone Ocean's fights will take that honor once they're brought to the animated medium. And as always, sound director Yoshikazu Iwanami continues to impress with his stellar direction of sound design, adding a staggering amount of heft to each battle and ensuring that every stand leaves its own unique audio-based imprint beyond their appearances and abilities. The sound design of Golden Wind's main villain in particular is the most memorable, invoking an ominous sense of imminent danger and the perverse nature of one twisting fate to suit their own desires. All of this helps to overshadow the usual weaknesses of stand battles, which include far too much spoken and internal dialogues and a lack of dynamic animation in favor of accurately recreating panels from the original manga.
お前ら、ふざけてないで出かけるぞ。え、どこに？ついてくればわかる。
Overall, after writing this review and having over a month to really process it, I don't think this part is awful. I don't think it's even that bad. There's quite a bit to enjoy here, and I can see why it's held in high regard among other fans in the JoJo community. But for me, the unfocused nature of Golden Wind's second half after a strong first half was a huge disappointment and almost became more distracting than the consistent tedium of Stardust Crusaders. Though having tons of good ideas, they aren't given the time to bloom into something truly incredible, leading to a season that's exciting to begin with before weakly collapsing at the finish line. And for that, Golden Wind gets a final score from me of a 6 out of 10. At the end of the day, I do recommend that if you've yet to see it and are still interested in checking it out, give it a watch yourself and make your own judgment. Especially in the case of JoJo, one of the things about a franchise with multiple installments is that everyone has their own favorite part, so what I find uninteresting might be more exciting for you, and vice versa. Now, before I go, I want to say this. I don't always want to go ranting and raving about something I didn't like as much, so because I still have positive passion about the concepts that this part introduces, I'll be making another video, a second part of sorts to this review, where I'll be sharing 3 separate rewrites that I came up with for Golden Wind. And of course, I'll be explaining my thought process behind specific decisions to provide insight on the benefit that they would serve. Needless to say, that video will effectively be spoiling Golden Wind in more detail. So if you haven't already and want to, do go watch it first before checking in with the rewrite video when it eventually arrives. Hope you guys enjoyed this review, and if you did, leave a like and your thoughts in the comments below. That'll be all from me for now, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.